The Nebra sky disc. In 1999, a group of amateur treasure hunters discovered an ancient bronze disc near the German town of Nebra. Measuring 13 inches in diameter and weighing around 4.4 pounds, the blue-green artifact features a crescent moon, 2 gold bands, with one possibly representing the horizon, and either a sun or a full moon. The group severely damaged the artifact while excavating it, then tried to illegally sell it to local archaeologists, who became suspicious and contacted law enforcement. Swiss authorities caught up to the criminals in 2003 after they tried to sell the disc to an undercover agent posing as an antiques dealer. Experts have struggled to trace the origins of the object, partially because it was not unearthed by professionals, who did not get the chance to explore the site immediately upon the discovery. The Nebra sky disk was originally dated to 1600 BC, which would make it around 3,600 years old, and qualify it as the oldest known depiction of the heavens. Many scholars disagree with this proposed date, and some have even alleged that the object is a fake. After all, with so little to go on, they have no way to learn about the mysterious prehistoric people who created the disk. A study published last year suggests that the Nebra sky disk is around 1,000 years younger than previously believed. The research also argues that the artifact lacks the deep meanings that other experts have assigned to it. Perhaps the most bold claim put forth in the study is that the disk was not discovered near Nebra. This sparked outrage among Germans, who value the object as a national treasure. Instead, the researchers believe that the Nebra sky disk dates back to sometime between 2,800 and 2,050 years old, during the Celtic Iron Age. They think that there may have been some confusion between law enforcement and the illicit treasure hunters, thus landing professionals at square one when it comes to identifying the disk. Sadly, without access to the original archaeological site, they may never be able to put it into proper context or identify the society that it belonged to. Egypt's Lost Hall of Records. While a Hall of Records might sound quite boring, there is a rumor that there is an ancient lost Hall of Records from ancient Egypt, similar to the Library of Alexandria, containing all the secrets and knowledge of the ancient world. Famous clairvoyant Edgar Cayce went into a trance and declared that the refugees from the lost city of Atlantis had buried their secrets in a Hall of Records under the Sphinx. Although he died in 1945, he wrote many books and started a holistic and paranormal research foundation. People inspired by Cayce's predictions went to Egypt to learn more about the pyramids and the Sphinx and tried to find these invaluable historical documents. Most scholars reject this belief, arguing that there is no actual evidence of such a place existing. In 1998, Director of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, Zahi Hawass, led excavations at the site, and the team reportedly discovered several natural caves containing no artifacts. But this did not stop people from believing that the Hall of Records is real. To this day, believers in ancient aliens accuse the Egyptian government and mainstream experts of blocking further investigations. They believe that authorities' denial of access to the site implies that they are keeping secrets about what's really there. The Sphinx has always gotten everyone's attention with its aura of magic and mysticism, and the strange, mysterious holes found throughout the structure make people wonder, what is the Sphinx hiding? There is one rumor that the Hall of Records was sealed off by a pre-Egyptian society way back in 10,500 BC, because that's the last time that the Leo constellation lined up with the area between the Sphinx's paws. How would anyone know that? I'm not sure. However, ground-penetrating radar has revealed empty spaces and abnormalities in the ground below the Sphinx. And while some say it is just caves, it is hard to believe the ancient Egyptians wouldn't take advantage of that space and use it for something sacred. Those who believe in the Hall of Records think that uncovering it would expose a wealth of information about ancient Egypt and world history, perhaps even what happened to Atlantis. They also assert that the documents within may not have been left by the ancient Egyptians, but perhaps by an advanced prehistoric society that we do not even know about. Uxmal. Uxmal was once a thriving Maya city centered around a 131-foot-tall pyramid. It was a Mesoamerican step pyramid known as the Pyramid of the Magician. It was once one of the largest cities on the Yucatan Peninsula, and was home to around 25,000 people at its peak. Although nobody knows when the Maya first settled in Uxmal, the settlement flourished between 600 and 1000 AD, with a major building period starting around the year 700. Construction on the Pyramid of the Magician began during the 6th century, and the structure was continuously expanded over the next 400 years. It was built in the Puuc architectural style, which is characterized by a plain bottom and ornate upper levels. With richer soil than the surrounding areas and more rainfall than the region sees today, the people of Uxmal enjoyed agriculturally favorable conditions. It was also rich in raw materials that were used for building the city's magnificent structures, including a wall that protected the people from outsiders. Uxmal ceased to be a political stronghold around 950 AD, according to some scholars, and it was ultimately abandoned for reasons that remain unclear to this day. It survived longer than cities to the south, which had started to fall the previous century. Restoration began on the ruins at Uxmal during the 19th century, and efforts to maintain the structural integrity of its buildings are ongoing. The Windeby bog bodies. Near the town of Windeby in the north of Germany, some locals were cutting peat from a bog for fuel. They got quite the surprise when they discovered a body. They stopped working immediately and reported it to the authorities. At the time, they believed the mummified body that they found in the bog was that of a teenage girl, and she was therefore called the Windeby Girl. More recently, the body has been reevaluated, and experts now know that it's actually the mummified remains of a teenage boy. The story behind how this young man ended up buried in a bog is quite frankly horrifying. Unfortunately, when the mummy was found, the machine used to cut the peat had already done some damage. In fact, they had accidentally cut off one of its legs, a foot, and a hand. But still, the rest of the body was able to be removed relatively intact. There were no grave goods like what you would expect to find in such an ancient burial plot from nearly 2,000 years ago. But there was a strange band of wool covering the person's eyes, as well as a collar around their throat. He is now more formally known as the Windeby I bog body. There were no signs of physical trauma, so we have no idea what happened to him. To make matters even more bizarre, a second body was later found nearby. It was a middle-aged man who had been strangled by a hazel branch and then placed in the bog on a stake. Clearly, something bad had happened here. At first, everyone thought perhaps this was an adulterous couple that had been punished and killed. But since now we know that both are male, and they died 300 years apart, historians have interpreted the remains as belonging to Germanic tribes who punished people who committed crimes by executing them and then staking their bodies in the bog. Of course, all we know is how the man died, but we will probably never know the reason why. Today you can see these remains of the bog bodies in a museum in Germany. Sri Lanka's Stargates. The sacred city of Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka is full of mystery. It was first occupied in 377 BC, then turned into a major city complete with massive Buddhist temples. Among the Buddhist temples is something unusual that hasn't been seen anywhere else in Sri Lanka or surrounding countries of similar origin and culture. In this location alone, there is a chart carved into the rock that seems to hold secrets of the universe. A chart that some people say is a Stargate. The chart is hard to see now because it's so old, and because it wasn't carved deep enough into the rock face, but it clearly shows mysterious symbols that appear to be associated with the cosmos. There is also a seating area carved out of rock in front of the chart, where people would have presumably sat to stare at it. But historians, archaeologists, and academics have been hopeless in identifying the marks on the map or figuring out why a seat had been carved in front of it. The biggest problem is that the iconography of the chart is unlike anything else carved in the city. There are strange circles, horizontal lines, and other bizarre shapes that kind of look like umbrellas. Basically, the chart is completely out of place and doesn't make any kind of sense to us right now. Some argue that it's as if it was carved by a completely different civilization, but that doesn't have to be the case. By far, the most bizarre theory is that the Stargate was a functional teleporter used by aliens to move from place to place on the planet, especially since other similar carvings have been found as far away as Peru and Egypt. Ostia Antica. 15 miles south of Rome, there is a lesser-known ancient harbor city called Ostia Antica. Situated at the mouth of the Tiber River, it functioned as ancient Rome's seaport. An inscription claims that Ostia Antica was built during the 7th century BC. Known for its remarkably preserved state, the site contains a castrum, or a military camp, dating back to the 3rd century BC, as well as a temple dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, known as the Capitolium. During the 1st century BC, Ostia saw fighting amid a series of civil wars between Gaius Marius and Sulla. Marius attacked the city in 87 BC, effectively cutting it off from trade with Rome. Then, in 68 BC, Ostia was plundered by pirates, who set the port on fire, destroyed the city's war fleet, and captured 2 of its prominent politicians. Pompey the Great, a top Roman general and statesman, raised an army and defeated the pirates within a year. Following the destruction, Ostia was rebuilt and fortified with protective walls. The city expanded throughout the 1st century AD under Tiberius, who ordered the construction of a forum and a new harbor. Ostia became so big it occupied 173 acres within its walls. During the 4th century, construction spilled outside the walls to the south of the city. Discoveries are still being made at Ostia. In 2008, archaeologists discovered the remains of the widest canal the Romans ever built, measuring 300 feet across. More ruins were discovered in 2014, and archaeologists have also found public latrines, which had several open seats, showing that going to the bathroom was not only something the Romans were unashamed of, but quite possibly a social activity. Ostia had public baths, a large theater, several taverns and inns, and even a firefighting service. It's also home to Europe's oldest known synagogue. Stone Age murder. Modern forensics and technology has just helped solve a murder mystery from the Stone Age. This is about as a cold case can get. Unsolved for 33,000 years. The skull of the victim was first uncovered by miners working in Romania back in 1941. It was clear by a huge crack in the top of the skull that the man had been hit very hard with something in the head. Researchers with the Eberhard Karls University in Germany wanted to know what exactly caused the huge crack in his skull. So they recently did experimental trauma simulations. What this means is that they tested different scenarios, such as falling off a cliff, being hit with a stick, or being bludgeoned with a rock. The researchers were able to pin down the most likely scenario. They say that it was actually 2 injuries that caused the Paleolithic man to die. The first was a linear fracture at the base of his skull. The second was a depressed fracture on the side of his cranial vault. The injuries have proven to be from 2 consecutive blows with some kind of baseball bat-like object. Plus, researchers were able to determine by the positioning of the fractures that the confrontation was face-to-face. In other words, the killer was holding the weapon in their left hand and looking straight in the eyes of the victim just before they beat them to death. It definitely wasn't an accident, though of course it's impossible to come up with the motive 33,000 years after the fact. The Sumerian King List. Even after a century of research, the Sumerian King List is still puzzling historians. The King List is one of the most incredible artifacts ever recovered from Iraq, where the great cities of Sumer once controlled the world. The list itself is an ancient manuscript written in the original Sumerian language, listing all the kings that ever ruled in Sumer. The reason the Sumerian King List is so mysterious is that it not only lists historical kings, but also mythical rulers who aren't supposed to have ever existed. Historians can't figure out where to draw the line between fantasy and reality, and that's made it very difficult to properly document Sumer's ancient past. The first piece of the King's List was found in the 1900s by the scholar Herman Hilprecht at the ancient site of Nippur. It dates back 4,000 years. It's also not the only one. At least 8 other examples have been found since 1906. Although most of them date from the Essene dynasty that lasted from between 2017 and 1794 BC. To make matters more confusing, none of the ancient documents are identical. Instead, they appear to show an ideal account of Sumerian history, a kind of fanciful history similar to what we find in the stories written in the Bible. All the fantasy has made it impossible to know which kings were real and which kings were simply myth. Yamashita's gold. There are rumors that a Japanese World War II general tried to hide a stash of gold in the Philippines. Ever since the war ended, treasure hunters have been searching for the legendary treasure said to be hidden near a remote village. American historian Sterling Seagrave believes that the Imperial Japanese forces committed large-scale looting during World War II, taking billions of dollars worth of stolen goods with help from the Yakuza gang and elite members of society. They supposedly stashed the treasure in caves, tunnels, and underground sites throughout the Philippines. Now known as Yamashita's gold, the alleged hoard is named after the Japanese general Tomoyuki Yamashita, who reportedly masterminded the thefts. Temptation to strike it big has attracted treasure hunters for over 50 years. Many experts reject the tale of the fabled gold and believe that people are wasting their time and money searching for something that simply doesn't exist. Meanwhile, local residents of a hillside village on the island of Panay have petitioned the government to stop allowing excavations, which are threatening to cause a deadly landslide that could bury several homes. In a desperate plea to officials last year, villagers accused scavengers of jeopardizing their safety. The treasure hunters stubbornly claimed that authorities permitted the search and said they had no plans to stop. A few months later, a group discovered a crumbling tunnel at one of the suspected treasure sites. Carved into a mountain, the labyrinth was too unstable to enter, so the team sent in a robot. It captured images of what appeared to be hand-chiseled walls, posts with numbers on them, and an old military-issued knife, possibly dating back to World War II. What do you think? Are fortune seekers endangering people's lives for nothing? Or might there be some truth to the legend? Let me know in the comments below. Broch of Gurness. Sometime between 500 and 200 BC, people began settling on the northeastern coast of mainland Orkney, an island in the Scottish Orkney archipelago. The people here built formidable structures during the Iron Age, called a broch, which was a walled structure like a fortress. There are hundreds of these brochs, and they were often surrounded by villages. The Broch of Gurness is perhaps one of the most impressive, and they were used as defensive structures and also to show off. The community's chief and his family probably lived in the tower. With walls measuring up to 13.5 feet thick, it kept raiders at bay and protected everyone inside, including cattle that might get stolen. It was equipped with a central hearth, stone-built cupboards lining the wall, stairs leading to the upper floors, and a sunken water basin, which may have been a well for drinking or used in rituals. An amphora dating back to the 1st century that was found at the site lends credibility to historical records claiming that a king of Orkney submitted to Emperor Claudius in 43 AD. The village was abandoned sometime after 100 AD, and thereafter served as a single farm until the 8th century. The last known activity to happen there was the burial of a Viking woman with some grave goods during the 9th century. Today, the broch is in ruins and is surrounded by the remains of multiple small stone dwellings that once housed the community's residents. It's the best preserved broch village and still contains traces of the town's main street, connecting the outer entrance to the broch. It is an amazing place to visit, so I've heard, and it helps give us a glimpse into what life was like during the Iron Age. Killed by tomb raiders. Archaeologists recently discovered the body of a Chinese man who had been stabbed to death and then dumped in a tunnel 1,300 years ago. The mystery came when archaeologists were excavating an ancient tomb in the northern Ningxiao region. They found the body of a man who was probably around 25 years old at the time of his death. His death was dated back to sometime between the years 640 and 680. Anthropologist Qian Wang from the Department of Biomedical Sciences at Texas A&M says the skeleton belonged to a healthy person. At least healthy until he was stabbed 13 times in the head, arms, and ribcage. Someone was really mad at this guy. Archaeologists found his remains slumped on the ground with his arms still covering his face in a last desperate bid to protect himself. Archaeologists were shocked, obviously dealing with an ancient murder. But judging by other evidence in the area, they were able to put together a strong hypothesis as to what happened. Because the man was discovered in a vertical shaft dug from the surface into the tomb by ancient tomb raiders, they believe that he was the unintended witness to a crime. He had likely stumbled upon the thieves as they were pillaging the tomb, and he surprised them. In the moment, the thieves killed him to ensure his silence. After the thieves finished stealing what they could from the grave, they threw the victim's body into the tunnel and then filled it back up with soil. If he hadn't died from the stabbing, he most certainly died from being buried alive. Decapitated Romans. A group of decapitated Roman skeletons have been unearthed at 3 separate Roman cemeteries. The cemeteries were in the UK, at a farm in Cambridgeshire. In total, 52 skeletons were found, all of them dating back about 1700 years. So far as archaeologists have been able to put together, the skeletons were once British Romans. This means they were technically born in Britain, but likely had Roman heritage. In any case, 17 out of the 52 skeletons were decapitated. The mystery here is that scientists can't quite figure out why some of them had their heads removed and others didn't. To make matters even stranger, those who had been decapitated had their head placed at their feet, and where their skull was supposed to be, a piece of pottery was placed instead. The best guess archaeologists have right now is that the decapitated individuals were executed for interfering with the Roman military. Because this particular farm was used as a supply center, and because there were so many civil wars happening at the time, it would make sense if there was some kind of rebellion here. The punishment for this sort of crime was definitely death. It could be that the rebels were killed, decapitated, and then buried in the most shameful way possible. If that's not the case, scientists don't know what happened to these poor people. Coventry Cube. While magnet fishing in the River Sow last year in Coventry, England, local resident Will Reed and his 2 sons discovered 64 lead cubes bearing mysterious ancient rune-like markings and inscriptions. The artifacts were rather small, with 47 of the cubes measuring just 2 centimeters long. The 13 other, more crudely made cubes were even smaller. Tiny enough to be picked up by the thumb and forefinger, the cubes were first mistaken for worthless debris. Based on social media responses, Reed believes that the inscriptions are a Hindu prayer ritual carved in Sanskrit, and that the prayers were thought to take effect when the cubes were thrown into running water. Writing for Coventry Live, journalist Josh Layton suggested that the cube faces contain a numerical equation meant to summon the protection of Rahu, a planet with godlike powers under the Hindu belief system. The arguably most credible theory holds that the cubes feature mystical worship diagrams called yantra. Similar objects have reportedly been found elsewhere, but the artifacts have not been definitively dated, leaving Reed and his following of intrigued social media users to speculate about their origins. Even more perplexing is the fact that the objects that appeared to be Indian were found in an English river. Additionally, the mudlarkers found a dozen pennies punched with a square hole in the center, as well as a coin featuring the Hindu goddess Dougga on one side and the word Shri on the other. After returning to the undisclosed site several times, Reed summed up his experiences by saying, "The more I learn, the stranger it becomes. Ain't it always the way?" For now, the identity of the people who created the obviously out-of-place cubes and the nature of their journey from India to Europe remains a mystery. Saqqara bird. Many mysterious artifacts have been unearthed at ancient Egyptian archaeological sites, reflecting the cryptic disconnect between modern humanity and our understanding of the ancient world. One of the most mystifying objects is the so-called Saqqara bird. Discovered in 1898 at the vast necropolis of Saqqara, the artifact dates back to around 200 BC. Made from sycamore wood, it's rather small, with a wingspan of just 7.1 inches. To this day, scientists remain stumped about the object's possible use. Because the falcon represents several important Egyptian gods, some believe that the Saqqara bird had a ceremonial purpose. Others have suggested that it was a toy belonging to an elite child, a boomerang, or that it functioned as a weather vane. More imaginative folks have suggested that the artifact, which bears an uncanny resemblance to an airplane, proves that flying technology existed during ancient times. Some have even gone as far as saying that the Egyptians may have invented the first aircraft, which archaeologists have never found evidence of. Naturally, mainstream experts largely reject the idea that the object represents a flying machine. Richard P. Hallion, the Pentagon's senior advisor for air and space issues, pointed out that the Saqqara bird is far too heavy and unstable to fly, essentially ruling out the possibility that it represents an aircraft that took off from the ground in the absence of modern technology. What the Saqqara bird meant to ancient Egyptians might be a secret lost forever to history. They took it with them to the grave. Man in the Iron Mask. The mysterious unidentified 17th century prisoner known simply as the Man in the Iron Mask has gone down in history with no name. All we know is that he was arrested in 1669 and spent upwards of 30 years in various French prisons. The prisoner wore a black velvet mask the entire time, right up until his death in 1703, leaving his identity a mystery to this day. Ever since, people have been trying to figure out who the man was. Scholars have debunked the claims of writer Alexander Dumas and the renowned philosopher Voltaire, who alleged that the prisoner was the twin brother of Louis XIV, also known as Louis the Great. Most modern experts believe that the man's name was Eustache Daugère, according to historian Paul Sonino, who claims that the captive was a valet for someone important. As a valet, you would have had a very close relationship with whoever he served, and may have overheard important secrets. This would explain why he was kept under such tight security for so long. Sonino thoroughly studied records and concluded that Daugère worked for the treasurer of a wealthy and high-ranking church official named Cardinal Mazarin. Evidence indicates that Mazarin may have accumulated some of his fortune by swindling English royalty. The historian theorized that Cardinal Mazarin's treasurer caught on to the dirty deed. Daugère, in turn, found out about it, and then he mentioned it to the wrong person. Perhaps his punishment came in the form of lifelong imprisonment, along with threats of execution if he ever dared to expose his identity. While we may not ever know what the man in the iron mask looked like, we now at least know who he probably was and what he might have been locked up for. Volubilis. Located in north-central Morocco, the ancient Berber city of Volubilis was established during the 3rd century BC and was the ancient capital of the Kingdom of Mauritania. It grew considerably after the Romans conquered it in 40 AD and eventually spanned 100 acres. The city was surrounded by 1.6 miles of walls and saw its biggest growth during the 2nd century. During this time, numerous public buildings popped up, including a temple, basilica, and triumphal arch. The Berbers recaptured Volubilis during the 3rd century, and it thereafter fluctuated between Christian and Muslim cultures. From the 8th to the 11th centuries, the city served as the capital of the Idrisid dynasty, but the rulers abandoned the site, and most of the population followed. Volubilis was subsequently forgotten. During the mid-18th century, the ruins were damaged by an earthquake. The site was identified as Volubilis during the late 19th century, and by then it had been heavily looted and vandalized. Excavations uncovered mosaics, homes, the Arch of Caracalla, and public buildings. Today, Volubilis is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has been partially restored. Dead in a cave. Archaeologists in the Scottish Highlands got another surprise when they discovered the skeleton of a man at the entrance of a cave they were excavating. He had been murdered about 1,500 years previously in the year 600 AD, and he had not died a quiet death. The first clue that he had been murdered came from the position of his body. He had just kind of been dumped into the cave with his legs crossed and heavy stones holding down his arms and legs. It was confusing because he had clearly been murdered, but then he was laid to rest inside the cave with a certain degree of consideration. Because of this, archaeologists say his murder may have been the result of interpersonal conflict or human sacrifice. Whatever the case, his death was brutal. According to Professor Dame Sue Black with Dundee University's Center for Anatomy and Human Identification, it took at least 5 blows to kill this man. Each blow resulted in an additional fracture to his skull. The first 3 impacts broke apart his teeth, fractured his left jaw, and broke the back of his skull. He was not going to go down peacefully. The 4th blow was probably meant to end his life. A weapon was driven through his skull from one side to the other. And finally, a 5th blow crushed the man's skull from the top. This is one of those murder mysteries that has yet to be solved. Nobody knows why he was killed, never mind in such a barbaric fashion. The sword in the monastery. An archaeology student made probably the most amazing find of her lifetime when she took notice of a sword at an Italian museum. The museum is inside an ancient Venetian monastery, and the sword didn't seem to match any of the other medieval artifacts on display. The student, Vittoria dal Armelina, demanded that the sword be investigated, and this opened up an ancient mystery that still hasn't been solved. The Venetian monastery is located on San Lazzaro degli Armeni, a small island in Italy. Those at the monastery thought the sword was only a few hundred years old. After actually dating the sword using scientific methods, it was determined to be over 5,000 years old. It's also been traced back to eastern Turkey, the same part of the world in which swords were were first invented during the Bronze Age. But how the sword got from the birthplace of the swordsmith to a random Italian monastery remains unknown. The monastery had been a congregation for Armenian Catholic monks ever since 1717. The sword was a donation gift from an Armenian art collector about 150 years ago. That art collector is obviously deceased now, and the only written records pertaining to the sword say that it was found near a small Greek colony called Pisac, located in eastern Turkey. No one knows who forged the sword, who owns the sword, or how it survived for so long, being passed between owners before arriving at the monastery. Terracotta head. The peculiar object known as the Tecajicalixtlahuaca head was discovered in 1933 in Mexico's Toluca Valley, northwest of Mexico City. Made from terracotta, the figurine was unearthed from a burial dating back to sometime between 1476 and 1510 AD. It seems to resemble a Roman artifact, calling its origins into question. Some have suggested that the head is evidence of pre-Columbian contact between Rome and indigenous people of the Americas. Is this a huge archaeological coincidence or what? Archaeologist José García Payón found the head inside a pyramid beneath 3 floors, along with numerous other objects, including items made from gold, copper, turquoise, rock, crystal, bone, shell, and more. A paper published in 2001 by researchers argues that the figurine dates back to 2nd century Rome based on its hairstyle and beard. The pair of researchers believe that a Roman ship may have gone adrift and reached the Central American shoreline centuries before Columbus and other explorers arrived. These claims came after the objects were dated to sometime between the 9th century BC and the 13th century AD, during the pre-Columbian era, lending potential credibility to this seemingly outlandish theory. Nobody has come up with a solid explanation for the out-of-place artifact. While experts believe that it's a hoax, others entertain the possibility that a European visitor brought it to the Americas, maybe during the colonial era. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Taj Mahal basement. The Taj Mahal was built in 1632 for Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan's favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal. Situated on a 42-acre complex in the modern-day city of Agra in India, the breathtaking monument is the couple's final resting place. Their tombs are locked in a sealed chamber in the building's basement and are generally off-limits to visitors. Directly above on the first floor, there are 2 replica burials on public display. On Shah Jahan's birthday in 2018, visitors received an extremely rare opportunity to see the authentic tombs firsthand. Sadly, they found the graves in a deplorable state, blackened from years of neglect, and so they called on the government to restore them and to grant regular public access. By allowing visitors regularly, authorities would be held to higher standards of accountability when it comes to maintaining the tombs. But officials maintained their typical cryptic demeanor, and the tombs remained closed. This type of response is one of several suspicious things people have pointed out about the Taj Mahal. There is also speculation that the structure was built on the site of a former Hindu temple, and that the basement contains Hindu artifacts and artwork. In 2019, a parliament member claimed that these objects had been removed from the Taj Mahal in 2011, and that he had documentation proving that it was built on stolen Hindu property. There is also the mystery of locked doors hidden underground, and nobody knows what's behind them. It's believed that there may be as many as 22 secret rooms beneath the Taj Mahal. If they do exist, only a privileged few know what's inside them. But even so, the mystery remains as to who built the rooms in the first place. Ciudad Perdida. Nestled deep in the tropical forests of Colombia's Sierra Nevada region, the ruins of La Ciudad Perdida, or the Lost City, are 650 years older than the famed Machu Picchu site in Peru. The ancient settlement was built by indigenous people around the year 800 and was massive for its time, with somewhere from 2,000 to 8,000 residents at its peak. In addition to its impressive size, Ciudad Perdida is also an incredible feat of engineering, since its builders constructed the city along a steep mountain ridge almost a mile above sea level. The elaborate network of drainage systems and stone bridges are still visible today, standing as a testament to the skill of Ciudad Perdida's builders. Experts believe that the Tairona people lived there until the 16th century, when they abandoned the site amid the arrival of Spanish conquistadors. The indigenous people who live in the region never forgot about the site, which they called Teyuna. They purposely kept its location a secret to prevent looting and vandalism by outsiders. Ciudad Perdida only became known to the rest of the world in the 1970s when it was rediscovered. The ruins are now open to the public and are only accessible via a 27-mile hike through challenging terrain in the sweltering heat. Hajar found on the Mediterranean island of Malta, Hajar is a megalithic temple complex and one of the world's oldest known religious sites. It's even older than Stonehenge, dating back to sometime between 3600 and 3200 BC. The site consists of a central building made up of C-shaped apses and 2 or more other structures. They were built with massive limestone blocks, with the largest measuring 17 feet high and weighing as much as 22 tons. Thick-bodied figurines, a phallic-shaped megalith, and other evidence found at the site indicates that it may have been used for fertility rituals. An altar with a concave top and the presence of animal bones further suggests that animal sacrifices may have been performed at Hajar. There are no human burials at the site, and no human bones have ever been found there. Maltese historian Giovanni Francesco wrote during the 17th century that the structures here prove that Malta's first inhabitants were a race of giants. People from Gozo in Malta believed that an extinct race of giants was responsible for building the impressive temples. When the temples were abandoned around 2500 BC, they were not rediscovered until the 19th century. Excavations began, but little has been done to restore the site. Made from soft limestone, the structures have suffered from severe weathering and are slowly disintegrating. Prehistoric murder. Now it's time for the oldest murder victim ever discovered. This individual died 430,000 years ago, give or take a few millennia. We don't know if they were a man or a woman, why they were killed, or even that many details surrounding their death. We do know that they were killed by blunt force trauma to the head. Archaeologists discovered this skull in a cave in Spain in the Atapuerca Mountains. They were immediately alarmed because it was visibly obvious that the victim had had their skull bashed inward. But that wasn't the only scary aspect. To get to the remains, the archaeologists had to scramble down a skinny chimney into an underground cavern to find the skull. Inside the cavern was a pit of bones. At least 28 people were dead inside the pit, including members of various hominid species. There were members of the ancient Homo heidelbergensis and another species of human ancestor that scientists had never seen before. Today, this is one of the oldest burial pits ever found on the planet. It's also one of the only burial pits where different species of humans have been found in the same place. Nobody knows why the bodies were dumped here, what the timeline looks like, or why the victim of our ancient murder mystery had their head caved in. It's truly one of the real archaeological mysteries still waiting to be solved. The New Mexico Massacre. 7 skeletons have been found in a secluded part of New Mexico deep inside a canyon, indicating there had been some type of massacre. The 5 adults, 1 child, and 1 infant were found to have been from the now extinct native Gallina culture. They occupied a small region of the southwestern state almost 1,000 years ago, but in the year 1275, they suddenly vanished, and all trace of them was lost. These skeletons, which were uncovered by the U.S. Forest Service in 2005, offer an explanation for what happened to these ancient people. According to Tony Larga Espada, the main researcher involved with the discovery, every single one of these people had been murdered, including the children. The bones had been shattered and broken apart, left behind in the dirt. Additionally, all the other skeletons that have been discovered in the area from the time of the Gallina also appeared to have been murdered. Archaeologists are now starting to suspect that there was not only a massacre here, but an ancient campaign of genocide, in which every last member of the Gallina were wiped out in just a few years, maybe as quickly as a few months. Curiously enough, it appears that the Gallina disappeared around the same time as the Anasazi, who built Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. Perhaps they were both wiped out by another culture who moved up from the south, like the Moche from Peru, whose gods were hungry for blood. Works of the Old Men. Thousands of mysterious stone structures have been found throughout the Middle East, referred to in archaeological circles as the works of the old men. The stone structures form geometric patterns, often in the shape of wheels. Some of them date over 8,500 years, making them older than most other geoglyphs in the world, even the legendary Nazca lines in Peru. The works of the old men can be found scattered throughout the Azraq oasis in Jordan, and they seem to have some kind of astronomical significance. They may have been built to line up directly with the sunrise on the day of the winter solstice, but nobody really knows. The structures were first seen by pilots flying with the Royal Air Force in World War I. Mention of them first appeared in 1927 in the journal Antiquity, but even after all these years, archaeologists are still a bit stumped. Not only are there geoglyphs in the shape of wheels, but there are also shapes referred to as kites, which are stone structures that were built to funnel and kill animals, and pendants, which are lines of stone cairns. There are the remains of walls that don't seem to make any sense, lines of stone graves, and other mysterious structures that can't even be identified. They are all across Arabia, from Syria to Jordan and all the way down to Yemen. Some were even built as recently as 5,500 years ago, meaning for at least 3,000 years, the area was highly active. But why these geometric shapes were built, and how the ancient people could have possibly done it without having aerial capabilities, is still a mystery. King Solomon's treasure. According to the Hebrew Bible, Solomon was Israel's third king. He reigned from 965 BC to 925 BC and was known for his immense wealth. The empire prospered under his leadership, during which time Solomon commissioned magnificent palaces and fortresses. He also reportedly had a huge collection of treasure, including the famed Ark of the Covenant, a gilded box that was supposedly built nearly 3,000 years ago, musical instruments made from gold, precious stones with religious significance, the tabernacle, and ornaments from the Garden of Eden. Throughout history, many people have searched for these items, which disappeared when the Babylonians sacked Solomon's temple in 597 and 586 BC, but experts and civilians alike have failed to find any of it. A legendary story written during biblical times, called the Treatise of the Vessels, describes how Solomon's treasures were stashed in hiding places throughout the Middle East. The Ark was said to have been taken and hidden by the Knights Templar, and may have ended up any number of places, if it was ever real in the first place. Archaeologists admittedly do not know whether the treasure was hidden, stolen, or destroyed. Determining its fate and actually finding it are extremely difficult when faced with untangling the Treatise of the Vessels and the many other stories about the Ark of the Covenant and Solomon's other relics. For now, the search continues for the legendary riches. The Maya extinction. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding the Maya civilization is the fact that they seemingly evaporated into thin air, seemingly overnight. Of course, it's not that simple. The decline was gradual, happening over the span of a few decades. Even before the Spanish ever arrived in North America, the Maya had pretty much vanished. There were still some of the Mayan people lingering, but their great cities were abandoned and their society was in ruins. What we know today is that drought seriously impacted Mayan civilization. There were 5 serious droughts throughout the history of the Maya that didn't seem to bog them down too much. But then, 2 devastating droughts in a row happened right before their civilization fell apart. By the year 1150, the Mayans were gone. The droughts that destroyed this once great culture went on from between 850 to 1000 AD. Over the course of 150 years, they went from boom to bust. There are some theories. Some believe that the Maya kingdom was too densely populated. They weren't prepared for a dramatic and fundamental change to the landscape. They had cities of over 100,000 people and had cut down forests and manipulated wetlands to create more room for farming and urbanization. They accidentally ruined their own agricultural success because of extensive deforestation. By the time these droughts came along, the Maya had ruined their environment. What happened next was a complete collapse of civilization, with not enough food to feed the bustling cities filled with people. But of course, this is just a theory. Archaeologists and historians still can't figure out why the people didn't eventually go back to the cities. They still don't know exactly what happened in Mexico and Guatemala over 1,000 years ago, and can only make educated guesses as to the fate of the Maya. Evidence of alien contact. According to ancient aliens, the Maya, along with many ancient cultures, seem to have had knowledge of math and science that came directly from the gods. How was their knowledge so advanced? It must have been ancient astronauts that came down to Earth. But when wars began and natural disasters struck, civilizations fell, and these alien visitors left Earth, taking their technology with them. In 2011, a Mexican government official announced that a new documentary and a collection of recently declassified artifacts would soon prove that the Mayans had contact with ancient aliens. Raul Julia Levy, who produced the film titled Revelations of the Mayans 2012 and Beyond, told Reuters that the Mexican government would soon release codices, artifacts, and significant documents proving the documentary's claims. At the time, the items were being kept in secure underground vaults, according to a press release from State of Campeche Tourism Minister Luis Augusto Garcia. He also spoke of the alleged presence of 3,000-year-old spacecraft landing pads in the Central American jungle. Julia Levy claimed that for thousands of years, the Mayans planned to rule the planet, but some unwelcome otherworldly visitors reportedly showed up and left behind evidence of their presence. That's why people should take them seriously, because what they are going to share with us is crucial to human survival. The filmmakers promised to back up their claims with factual evidence, but as I'm sure you're not surprised to learn, this hasn't happened yet. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of the whole ordeal is that they managed to get a government official's backing. In 2018 and 2019, archaeologists made incredible discoveries in Mexico, from a treasure trove of artifacts in a cave to an entire lost city the size of Manhattan. The incredible discoveries are putting the Maya back on the map, and everyone is excited about what we might find next. Crystal skulls. Legend claims that an ancient Mesoamerican civilization, possibly the Maya, possessed 13 crystal skulls with supernatural powers. They were supposedly created somewhere in Central America between 15,000 and 10,000 years ago. Today, the skulls are rumored to be scattered throughout different collections. They allegedly vary in size and shade, with some being clear while others are smoky or colored. The artifacts supposedly range from being human-sized and intricately detailed to smaller and less detailed. Many believe that these obscure objects have healing properties and enhance the psychic abilities of the people around them. There are varying theories about the crystal skulls. Some people believe that ancient aliens, or the residents of the mythical lost island of Atlantis, made the skulls. Pseudoscience author Joshua Shapiro believes that the skulls are ancient computers that detect and record nearby energy and vibrations. He co-authored a book on the topic, in which he claims that these skulls contain a history of the world, and that they pictorially replay all the images of people and things they've come into contact with. Where did he get this information? I mean, that would be really cool if it were true. Most mainstream experts doubt these claims, which is kind of understandable given their fantastical nature. And why would the Atlanteans give crystal skulls to the Maya? Using electron microscopes, scientists from the British Museum and the Smithsonian Institution analyzed some of the skulls. They found markings made with modern tools and determined that the items were probably manufactured in Germany, sometime during the mid to late 19th century. In other words, it's highly unlikely that any of the far-flung stories surrounding the skulls are true. Dougga. The best-preserved Roman town in Africa can be found at Dougga in northern Tunisia. Founded in the 6th century BC on the site of the former Numidian capital of Dougga, the settlement was on a plateau overlooking the surrounding plains, giving its inhabitants an advantage over any suspicious outsiders. The discovery of Bronze Age burial structures called dolmens suggests that the site was occupied as early as 2000 BC. However, most of the ruins are from the Roman era, including a theater that held as many as 3,500 people, a chariot racing circus, mosaic floors, cobblestone streets, a group toilet, 2 triumphal arches, and several baths dated to around 300 AD. The settlement contains 20 temples, which is a lot for a population that peaked at around 5,000. Because of this, researchers initially believed that Dougga was a significant religious site, but they later determined that wealthy residents built the temples as a testament to their good fortune. The most famous temple is the Capitol, which was built during the 2nd century as a dedication to the gods Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, known as Rome's protective triad. Based on the site's scant evidence of Christianity, it appears as though Dougga experienced an early decline during the 4th century. What exactly happened is unknown. Pisac. Located in the sacred valley of the Incas in what is now Peru, the Pisac ruins are among the country's most intact archaeological sites. Built on a mountain overlooking the modern-day town of Pisac and the Urubamba River, the ancient settlement contains evidence of occupation even before the Incas arrived. Vessels from the Lucre and Quilqui pottery cultures have been found in the area, where the first inhabitants lived on a hillside and raised their crops on terraces. Experts believe that the Inca Empire conquered the site around 1440. Under Emperor Pachacuti, they built a settlement which functioned as a citadel, observatory, and religious site. It supported a small population and was a royal retreat for the emperor's panaca, or family and descendants. Situated far from the Inca capital of Cusco, the settlement allowed Inca nobility to relax with relatively little fear of invading enemies. But the complex was not immune to destruction, and during the early 1530s it was destroyed by Francisco Pizarro and the Spanish conquistadors. 40 years later, during the 1570s, the modern-day town of Pisac was built in the valley below. Pisac was first described in modern literature in the late 19th century, when the U.S. Commissioner to Peru visited and recorded a detailed account of the Inca ruins. The 65-acre complex sits as high as 11,529 feet above sea level in some parts. This lesser-known, off-the-beaten-path tourist destination offers visitors a fascinating look into the pre-Columbian life of indigenous South Americans. Murder by Hadrian's Wall. A young ancient victim was found at Hadrian's Wall in the United Kingdom. The child may very well have been killed some 1,800 years ago. According to the experts, this young person was either a child slave or the offspring of a soldier from mainland Europe, serving at this far-east outpost in the Roman Empire. Hadrian's Wall was built by the Romans when they occupied the United Kingdom. It marked the boundary of the Roman Empire, or as far as they would ever conquer. It was manned by Roman soldiers, with many of these soldiers coming from other parts of the empire. The body was found in a shallow pit at the corner of a back room at the old Roman fortress. Researchers immediately thought it was strange because most bodies were buried far away from settlements so that ordinary folk wouldn't be contaminated by the dead. Dr. Trudy Buck from Durham University was able to determine that the child was about 10, though no one knows if it was a boy or a girl. Dr. Buck also says this was definitely a case of murder, since the body appears to have been stashed rather than buried. Also, the skull has a distinct fracture that means the child was hit over the head with something heavy. DNA tests show that the child came from the Mediterranean. That means they were either the child of a foreign soldier or a slave. Seeing as child slavery was huge business in ancient Rome, it wouldn't be surprising. It could be that the child's Roman owner got angry, killed the child, then stashed the body under the fort. Iron Age spinal miracle. During the Iron Age, a man took an arrow to the spine. He survived long enough for his bone to heal around the point of metal, when by all accounts, the horrific spinal injury should have killed him. During what must have been a fierce battle, he was shot in the back, and the bronze arrowhead lodged into one of his vertebrae. He also had fractured ribs, but it's unclear if he sustained both injuries at the same time. According to Svetlana Zvyatko with the Queen's University Belfast, this person was extremely lucky to survive. Normally, a vertebral wound would damage the main blood vessels and result in an immediate death. Other than the fact that this warrior was incredibly hardy and basically unkillable, we don't know much more about him. He stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, a considerable giant for the Iron Age. The average height of a Scythian warrior was only 5 feet 4 inches. He was also buried in an impressive grave sometime around the 8th century BC in central Kazakhstan. This was the part of Central Asia dominated by the Scythians, powerful nomadic warriors, for hundreds of years until the 2nd century AD. Sadly, his grave had already been pillaged centuries ago. Archaeologists found nothing except his body and some other mysterious scattered bones. No one knows who this formidable and unkillable warrior once was. Roman dodecahedron. No Roman artifacts have stumped experts as much as the dodecahedron. These bizarre artifacts are not mentioned in Roman texts, and over 200 experts have unsuccessfully tried to determine their use. Some believe that dodecahedra were somehow used in astronomical equations, such as calculating the best time for planting winter crops, or as surveying instruments for measuring land distances. The most credible theory suggests that the objects were used for knitting or crocheting. One student even tested the idea and created a glove. It's also possible that dodecahedra were nothing more than decorations or children's toys. The dodecahedra are small, hollow copper alloy objects with 12 flat pentagonal faces that have holes of varying diameters in the center. They range in size from 1.6 to 4.3 inches and date back to between the 2nd and 4th centuries. The first dodecahedron was found in 1739. Since then, at least 116 of them have been discovered throughout Central Europe. The southernmost dodecahedron was found in Arles, France, and the northernmost appeared near Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain. For nearly 3 centuries, the object's purpose has remained a mystery. Found in an unusual variety of places, including public baths, temples, and military camps, dodecahedra lack the consistency needed to gain useful archaeological context. They have also appeared in coin hoards, indicating that they may have been valued objects. But why then did the Romans not talk about them? For being so common, they are utterly mysterious. What do you think they were used for? Let me know in the comments below. Cleopatra's lost tomb. The Ptolemaic dynasty of ancient Egypt ended after Cleopatra VII's death in 30 BC. She and her lover Mark Antony committed suicide and were said to be buried together in a magnificent tomb. Filled with treasures made from gold, silver, emeralds, pearls, and ivory, the burial was located near a temple dedicated to the Egyptian god Isis, according to the 1st century writer Plutarch. The tomb's location remains a mystery to this day. Archaeologists have excavated numerous sites in hopes of finding it, but to no avail. One woman, Kathleen Martinez, has devoted the bulk of her career to searching for Cleopatra's final resting place. Her team has spent 14 years digging at a site outside Alexandria called Taposiris Magna, which Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities excavated in 2010 with no luck. Martinez believes that Cleopatra was determined not to let the conquering Roman Empire find out where the tomb would be, so she escaped as a prisoner and ended her life in a place where her own people would find her remains before her captors could. In the process, she evidently also outsmarted the modern-day experts, who have painstakingly searched for it, only to turn up empty-handed. Most researchers believe that the chances of finding Cleopatra's tomb are slim, despite Martinez's optimism. Last year, Live Science spoke with scholars who are experts on Cleopatra, and they were less than confident that her burial will ever be uncovered. They pointed out the possibility that the tomb is located in a part of Alexandria that is now submerged. It's also possible that the burial has been looted and plundered beyond recognition. Do you think Cleopatra's tomb will ever be found? Let me know in the comments below. An ancient bullet. Sometime around 2,000 years ago, a man was murdered in Greece. The murderer killed this person by driving something very sharp into his chest. Archaeologists investigating the body believe it was a unique type of spear, driven into the man so hard that it left an almost perfect circle in his sternum, almost like an ancient bullet. The ancient weapon used in the murder was called a styrax. Anagnostis Aguilarakis from Adelphi University says that in 40 years of studying archaeology, they have never witnessed such a perfect wound on any remains. They say that the spear was thrust at a close range with immaculate precision, stabbed straight through the sternum. So who was the person who got killed? He was tall for the day, standing 5'7". He was also about 50 years old and was extraordinarily muscular. It remains a mystery why he was killed. Though seeing as this was ancient Greece, it probably had something to do with political upheaval. The real fascinating part is the wound in his chest. After doing experiments with the physics department, Anagnostis discovered that it would have taken about 500 pounds of pure force to pierce the man's sternum. Even though the victim was quite buff, whoever killed him was an absolute beast. An ancient bullet. Sometime around 2,000 years ago, a man was murdered in Greece. The murderer killed this person by driving something very sharp into his chest. Archaeologists investigating the body believe it was a unique type of spear, driven into the man so hard that it left an almost perfect circle in his sternum, almost like an ancient bullet. The ancient weapon used in the murder was called a styrax. Anagnostis Aguilarakis from Adelphi University says that in 40 years of studying archaeology, they have never witnessed such a perfect wound on any remains. They say that the spear was thrust at a close range with immaculate precision, stabbed straight through the sternum. So who was the person who got killed? He was tall for the day, standing 5'7". He was also about 50 years old and was extraordinarily muscular. It remains a mystery why he was killed. Though seeing as this was ancient Greece, it probably had something to do with political upheaval. The real fascinating part is the wound in his chest. After doing experiments with the physics department, anagnostics discovered that it would have taken about 500 pounds of pure force to pierce the man's sternum. Even though the victim was quite buff, whoever killed him was an absolute beast. Hannibal's elephant. Hannibal Barca was a Carthaginian general who fought against Rome during the Second Punic War. He was born in 247 BC and died in 182 BC, and ever since then, his name has been associated with great military genius. His most notable achievement was in 218 BC, when he led 100,000 troops and 40 elephants through the Alps to fight the Romans. But to this day, nobody has been able to figure out where he managed to pick up the famous 40 elephants. Keep in mind that ancient Carthage is located in modern Tunisia, extremely far away from any areas one might easily obtain elephants. As far as scientists are aware, there were only 2 species of elephants alive back then, the Asian and the African, and he wasn't anywhere close to where these elephants lived in the wild. Historians also aren't sure which type of elephant he had. All we know is that he had at least 40 of them. Some historians suggest he got the elephants from a small forest near Morocco, and that they were a subspecies that have since gone extinct. These hypothetical elephants would have grown 8 feet tall at the shoulders, perfect for military action. But it's honestly impossible at this point to say if these elephants ever did truly exist. If they did, it's possible that the great general Hannibal Barca helped hasten them along to extinction by taking them all with him through the Alps to battle the Romans. First seismoscope. Humanity's quest to understand and predict earthquakes dates back at least 2,000 years to the invention of the first seismoscope in China. Zhang Heng was an inventor, historian, mathematician, astronomer, and geographer, a jack of all trades. He presented his device to the Han Dynasty court in 132 AD, and he called it an instrument for measuring the winds and the movements of the earth. Measuring nearly 6 feet in diameter, the seismoscope was a giant cylindrical bronze vessel with 8 dragons on the side marking the primary compass directions. Each dragon had a ball in its mouth, and there were 8 bronze toads below, waiting with their mouths open to catch the balls. Nobody knows exactly what the seismoscope looked like, but those are the details that researchers generally agree on. One record claims that the instrument was intricately engraved with mountains, tortoises, birds, and other animals. Right before an earthquake happened, a ball dropped into a frog's mouth, making a sound that alerted people to the impending disaster. The ball that fell would point toward the earthquake's origin, but it told nothing of the earthquake's intensity. The seismoscope proved to be incredibly valuable to the ancient Chinese for its predictive abilities. For example, several days after a ball dropped into a toad's mouth in the Han Dynasty capital of Luoyang, messengers arrived from Gansu province to report a major earthquake that had happened over 1,000 miles away. In the following centuries, other creative minds improved the device as its use spread across Asia. The Persians developed a similar instrument during the 13th century, although it's unknown whether they came up with the idea independently or were inspired by the Chinese. Modern experts have no idea how the seismoscope worked. There are theories about a pendulum or a stick on the inside triggering a dragon to release a ball, but this remains unproven. The heretical monk. Giordano Bruno was a 16th century Italian monk and philosopher from Naples, whose beliefs about the universe got him in some serious hot water with the Catholic Church that eventually led to his death. He studied all books he could get his hands on, even ones forbidden by the Church. He suggested the suns are stars that planets revolve around, which we know today is actually the truth. But back then, a statement like this challenged the claims of big-name thinkers like Copernicus and Kepler, who believed that our Earth and solar system was the center of the universe, and everything else revolved around us. Labeled a radical, Bruno fled Naples in 1576 to avoid the Inquisition. In an effort to stop the spread of the Protestant religion, the campaign sought to persecute people whose views disagreed with the Catholic Church, and Bruno certainly fell into that category. He spent several years in France, where he gained the favor of some influential people, and eventually moved to London, where he lived in the French ambassador's home. Although he had supporters, Bruno routinely encountered opposition. He returned to France, wore out his welcome there, moved to Germany, and then was invited to relocate to Venice. There, Bruno was arrested by the Inquisition and he was imprisoned for the next 8 years. During that time, he was repeatedly questioned and tried for heresy, but refused to recant his beliefs. In 1600, Bruno was burned at the stake. Records of the event are missing, so nobody knows what the specific reasons were for putting him to death. It's also unclear whether his cosmological beliefs were the main motivating factor for giving him the death penalty, or if other religious offenses played a role. Perge. Settled around 1500 BC by the Hittites, Perge, also called Perga, was strategically situated where two rivers converge in modern-day Turkey's Antalya province, near the Mediterranean coast. Over the next 1,000 years, it changed hands multiple times between the Greeks, Persians, Athenians, and others. Alexander the Great passed through the area in 333 BC and took control of the city, which didn't put up much of a fight. In 133 BC, Perge was bequeathed to the Romans. According to the New Testament, the Apostle Paul visited Perge twice during his first missionary journey. During the first 5 centuries of the Common Era, formerly called the Christian Era, after serving as a seat of worship for the Greek goddess Artemis, the city became a flourishing epicenter of Christianity. A devastating earthquake prompted Perge's residents to flee during the 11th century, and it's been deserted ever since. The Turkish government began excavations and renovations in 1946, revealing an array of stunning structures including a theater, stadium, palace, 2 churches, a fountain, aqueducts, the Temple of Artemis, and more. Mass cannibalism. In the ancient village of Herxheim in modern-day Germany, about 7,000 years ago, hundreds of people were butchered. They were likely ritually sacrificed, eaten by other humans, and then had their remains thrown into a pit. According to anthropologists from the University of Bordeaux in France, the sudden explosion of cannibalism could have had something to do with ritual sacrifice. But this wasn't a friendly ritual sacrifice. The cannibals at the village may have brought slaves or prisoners of war back to their settlement before brutally murdering and eating them. But these villagers weren't the only ones eating other people. Cannibalism was fairly common in the early Neolithic period in Europe. This was around the time that farming started to spread across the continent. Villages would often fight against others for whatever reason, then take their bodies back home to eat. Archaeologists know this because of markings on the skeletons, indicating that they had been butchered in the exact same way as animals. However, it's impossible to say exactly what happened at Herxheim. It was definitely cannibalism, but the motive is still up in the air. Whatever happened was extreme, since archaeologists have never before found so many cannibalized victims killed in the same brief span of time. The Tomb of Alexander. We have been searching for the tomb of Alexander the Great for hundreds of years, and while it's never been physically found, an Egyptian official recently claimed that it's located in Siwa, Egypt. The claim is a bit flimsy though, since it was made by the director of Siwa's tourism department, the one guy who would profit most from Alexander's tomb being in his region. He says that between 1995 and 1996, archaeologists found a temple from the Greco-Roman era that could contain the tomb. Unfortunately, the tomb hasn't actually been found in the temple. Instead, the director is simply insinuating that it's hiding somewhere inside. It's completely unverified, although definitely possible. Alexander the Great did visit the Siwa oasis while in Egypt, and the region is so secluded that it wouldn't be a big shock if it contained a lost tomb. The Siwa oasis is even home to the fabled oracle's temple, where Alexander was given confirmation by the oracle that he was indeed the son of Zeus. Iron Pillar of Delhi. At 24 feet high, an iron pillar is the centerpiece of the ruins of northern India's oldest mosque at the Qutb complex in Delhi's Morali neighborhood. Although it weighs over 6,614 pounds, it was likely constructed somewhere else before being moved to its present location. This gargantuan 1,600-year-old monument is famous for its rust-resistant qualities. Archaeologists and other experts have long been fascinated by its lack of corrosion despite its age, especially in Delhi's weather, which fluctuates between hot, cold, dusty, and rainy. The pillar was once topped with an animal, which was probably removed during the Sultanate period because the imagery violated Islamic beliefs. It has a 4th century inscription in the Sanskrit language and Brahmi script. Known as the Gupta Brahmi, the carving is named after the Gupta Empire, which reigned throughout northern and central India between the 4th and 7th centuries. The inscription tells how King Chandra erected the pillar as a testament to his battle victories, and dedicated the structure to the Hindu god Vishnu. There were 2 rulers named Chandra, but the message refers to Chandragupta II, who reigned from 375 to 415. One legend claims that the Sultan Iltutmish brought the pillar to Delhi, which was his capital, as a trophy. Another story holds that a king named Anangapal moved the structure to Delhi when he founded the city during the 11th century. On top of the mystery of how the pillar reached the site, its pristine state begs the question of how and why it doesn't rust. It's not likely an otherworldly or alien object, as it might be easy to assume, given its remarkable success against time and the elements. The structure was made using a practice known as forge welding, which caused a protective chemical coating to form over the iron during the smelting process. While the method itself was rather primitive, it afforded the advantage of preserving the pillar for thousands of years to come. At the same time, the monument stands as a reminder of the ingenuity of India's earliest ironsmiths. Copper Scroll Treasure. Discovered in a cave at the Qumran archaeological site on Israel's West Bank in 1952, the Copper Scroll is different from all of the other Dead Sea Scrolls. Not only is it made from copper, unlike the others, which were written on parchment, but it contains an extensive list of 64 places where literal tons of gold and silver treasures are buried or hidden. Their modern-day value would be astronomical, likely numbering in the trillions of dollars. But the list was written using cryptic language and does not provide precise locations, and nobody has ever found anything from the hoard. Dating back over 1,900 years, the scroll was created when the Roman Empire controlled the Qumran region. Researchers can't seem to agree on a precise date for when the treasures were hidden, but it's safe to say that it was during or around the same time the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Many experts theorize that the stashing occurred before the sacking of the Second Temple in 70 AD. Meanwhile, some scholars believe that the list contains an unrealistic amount of gold and silver, too much for the treasures to possibly really exist. Sadly, this is one historical mystery that may never be solved, but will be kept alive by those who believe and who are determined to find the missing treasure. Pula. Pula is a seafront city situated at the southern tip of Croatia's Istrian Peninsula. Owing to its strategic location, it's been occupied, destroyed, and rebuilt multiple times. An Illyrian tribe was the first to settle the area around 3,000 years ago, with Pula functioning as a fortified hill town. During the 1st century, the Romans conquered the city and built temples, a theater, arches, villas, an arena, and a forum. You know, like they always do. Many of these structures remain in place today. One of Pula's most iconic structures is the Triumphal Arch of Sergius, which was built to commemorate members of the local Sergius family. Even more famous is the city's arena. Construction began during the reign of Augustus, and the arena was finished in the late 1st century AD by Emperor Vespasian. It remains mostly intact, boasting 100-foot walls and 4 towers that gave guests access to the building's upper tiers. As many as 20,000 spectators gathered there at a time to watch gladiator fights. A canopy protected them from the rain, while a gutter running along the top of the structure channeled rainwater from the building. During the Middle Ages, the stone seats were harvested for other construction projects, but the arena is equipped with wooden seats and hosts concerts during the summer. Archaeological work at Pula is ongoing, but a lack of maintenance funds in recent years has threatened to close down parts of the site, and the rare glimpse into the past that the city offers might soon be gone. The Death Pit. 8,000 years ago, a woman around the age of 19, along with a man slightly older than her, fell into a well. Either that, or they were pushed. Archaeologists are calling it a Stone Age murder mystery. Nobody can tell whether the couple fell by accident or if foul play was involved. It does seem a little strange that 2 people would fall into a well purely by accident. 1 would be understandable, but 2 really makes you wonder. The couple lived during the Stone Age in what is today Israel. The well is still around all these years later, near the ancient settlement of Enot Nisanit. The well itself is 26 feet deep, made completely out of stone sunken into the bedrock. At its mouth, the well gapes 4 feet wide. The 2 skeletons were not the only things that archaeologists found inside the well. They also uncovered tools, ancient garbage, and bones from animals. It appears that after the people fell into the well or were pushed, the villagers stopped using it to drink out of and turned it into a garbage dump. Even 8,000 years ago, people knew that dead bodies and fresh drinking water didn't mix. But unfortunately, there is really no way to tell if these people were killed by some evil villain. It is possible that they were murdered, pushed into the well to contaminate the water on purpose, or it could be that somebody was trying to make the entire village sick. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Roanoke's lost colony. In 1585, English settlers in the New World established a colony on the island of Roanoke, in what is now North Carolina. All 115 settlers then mysteriously disappeared. To this day, archaeologists and historians have no idea what happened to them or why they vanished. It's actually one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of America. Archaeologist Martha Williams, along with others from the First Colony Foundation, found physical evidence that may help finally solve the enduring mystery. They discovered a secret message written on a very old map that seems to indicate the settlement split into different camps and were then assimilated into the local indigenous populations. Until now, most of the theories as to what happened to the colony have been pretty grim. Some say the colonists were wiped out by Native Americans, that hostile Spaniards killed them all, or that they were decimated by disease, famine, or even a deadly storm. But the information discovered on the map, which is currently housed at the British Museum in London, shows that the colonists may have actually separated and made two different forts away from the original settlement. When archaeologists went to these locations to see if the forts really had been built, they found several dozen shards of English pottery. This suggests that there were people living here. However, they seem to have been incorporated by the local indigenous population, abandoning their new forts and disappearing into history. Thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe if you haven't already for more mysterious archaeological discoveries. See you next time. Bye!